Hey guys, tonight we are going to sit with one of the most closely documented and most painful missing persons cases in recent American memory. A case in which we can follow a young woman almost step by step through the last night anyone can account for, and still cannot tell you what happened to her at the end of it. Her name was Lauren Spierer, and she was 20 years old, a student at Indiana University, petite and bright and dearly loved. In the early morning hours of June 3rd, 2011, after a night out in the college town of Bloomington, Lauren walked into a gap that no camera caught and no witness has ever filled, and she has never been seen again. Before we settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you find real value in what we do here. There is no pressure and no guilt. Thank you, truly, for the case suggestions that keep finding their way to us. We are also now on Spotify, so the link is in the description if you would rather listen there while you drift off tonight. Now dim the lights and get comfortable. This is a long one, and Lauren's story deserves to be told slowly and carefully, and with an unusual degree of caution, because this is a case where careless words can do real harm to real and innocent people. Several young men were the last to see Lauren alive, and not one of them has ever been charged with anything. They cooperated with the police. They are, in the eyes of the law and in the account we are going to give tonight, innocent people. And we are going to say so clearly and repeatedly, because a story like this is a standing temptation to point fingers, and we are not going to do that. We are going to tell you what is known, hold firmly to what is fair, and keep Lauren herself at the center, where she belongs. Have you ever wondered how a young woman can be followed almost minute by minute across a college town on a summer night, captured on camera after camera, tracked through a detailed timeline that investigators reconstructed corner by corner, and still simply vanish at the end of it, leaving no trace of the moment she disappeared? That is the strange and agonizing heart of Lauren Spierer's case. We know so much about her last night, more than in almost any comparable case, and it has never been enough. The very richness of the record makes the final blank all the more unbearable. To understand it, we have to begin with who Lauren was, and then walk that last night with her, slowly and carefully, all the way to the edge of the unknown. Lauren Spierer was born in the winter of 1991 and grew up in Scarsdale, New York, a town outside New York City, in a close and loving family. By the summer of 2011, she was 20 years old, a student at Indiana University, far from home in the flat green college town of Bloomington. She was studying textiles merchandising, building toward a future in a field she cared about. She was, by every account, warm and vivacious and magnetic, the kind of young woman who drew people to her and held on to friends. She was also physically tiny, only about 4'11", a small and slight young woman, a detail that would weigh on everyone who thought about how vulnerable she might have been in the hours she disappeared. There is one more fact about Lauren that belongs here at the start, because it is part of the medical reality of her case, and it deserves to be stated plainly and without drama. Lauren had a heart condition called long QT syndrome, a disorder of the heart's rhythm that can, in certain circumstances, cause dangerous and even fatal disturbances of the heartbeat. It is a real and documented part of her medical history, and it matters to the case because it means that Lauren's body carried a specific vulnerability, one that could become dangerous under stress, exhaustion, or the influence of alcohol. We raise it now not to sensationalize it, but because any honest account of what might have happened to Lauren has to include the truth of her own health, carefully and compassionately, as one part of a larger picture. It is worth understanding a little more about long QT syndrome, because it is central to one of the real possibilities in this case, and because it is widely misunderstood. The name refers to a specific pattern in the electrical activity of the heart, a lengthening of one phase of the heartbeat that can, under certain conditions, tip the heart into a dangerous rhythm. For many people who have it, the condition is manageable and they live full, ordinary lives. But it carries a real risk, and that risk rises under particular stresses, including physical exhaustion, certain medications, and, importantly, alcohol. A person with long QT syndrome is, in a real physiological sense, carrying a hidden vulnerability, a heart that is a little more likely than most to falter under the wrong combination of circumstances. It is not a death sentence, and most days it is not even a worry, but it is a genuine part of the medical reality that Lauren carried in her body. We say all of this gently because Lauren's condition is not a fault or a weakness, and it is not the point of her story. It is simply a fact about her, one that would matter a great deal to any honest reckoning with what might have happened to her on the night she disappeared. A young woman with a heart rhythm disorder, deeply intoxicated, physically exhausted, alone in the small hours, is a person whose body was under exactly the kinds of stress that her condition made dangerous. That does not tell us what happened. It only tells us that one real possibility lives inside Lauren's own medical history, and that possibility has to be held alongside all the others, with the same care we bring to everything else in this case. Let's stay a little longer with who Lauren was as a person, because she was so much more than a set of case facts. She was, by the accounts of everyone who knew her, a bright light, funny and warm and full of energy, the kind of young woman who filled a room and drew people to her. She was devoted to her friends and close with her family, especially her parents and her sister, the anchors of a loving home in Scarsdale. She had come to Indiana University, a long way from her New York home, to build a life and a future, and she was doing exactly that, studying a field she cared about, making friends, living the ordinary adventurous life of a young person out on her own for the first time. She was, in short, a young woman at the beginning of everything, and the whole tragedy of her case is measured against the fullness of the life she was living and the life she should still be living now. You're in a memory of Lauren before any of this, on an ordinary good day in her ordinary good life, and it is the version of her that her family fights to keep at the center. Here she is with her friends, laughing at something. Here she is on the phone with her mother, sharing the small news of a college day. Here she is small and bright and alive, a young woman who assumed, as we all do at 20, that there would be endless days ahead. That is the Lauren her family once remembered, not the timeline, not the surveillance stills, not the grim searches, but the living young woman who was loved and who loved in return. And holding on to that Lauren, the person, rather than the case, is part of what we owe her tonight. Think about everything that was taken when Lauren vanished, not only from her, but from the world. She was 20. She had a whole life in front of her, the career she was studying toward, the friendships that would have deepened, the family she was close to, and perhaps one day a family of her own. She would be in her mid-30s now, a grown woman with a life we can only imagine. The college student long behind her. All of that was erased in the space of a single summer night. The entire unlived future of a bright young woman, gone. When we mourn Lauren, we mourn not only the 20-year-old who disappeared, but the woman she never got to become. All the years and the joys and the ordinary days that were stolen from her, along with her life. That is the true measure of a case like this, and it is easy to lose sight of amid the timelines and the theories. The loss is not an abstraction. It is a specific young woman with a specific life, and the specific, incalculable weight of everything she would have done and been. Her parents do not grieve a case. They grieve a daughter, the small bright girl she was, the young woman she became, the grown woman she should be now. Her sister does not miss a mystery. She misses a sibling, a particular person with a particular laugh and particular habits, a presence that can never be replaced. To keep that specificity in view, to remember that Lauren was a whole and irreplaceable person and not a puzzle, is the deepest respect we can offer her. To be fair, it is hard to hold on to the person when the case is so consuming, when the timeline and the surveillance and the 15 years of speculation crowd in and threaten to reduce Lauren to a set of facts. But we have to try, because she deserves it, and because the whole point of telling her story with care is to keep her human. Lauren Spierer was not a cautionary tale or an unsolved file. She was a beloved daughter and sister and friend, a real young woman who laughed and dreamed and lived, whose absence has left a hole in the world that 15 years have not filled. That is who we are talking about tonight. That is who we are trying to honor. And that is who the truth, whenever it finally comes, will be for. Picture the shape of Lauren's life in that early summer of 2011, because it was, in most ways, the ordinary life of a college student. She lived in an apartment in Bloomington, near the campus and the strip of bars and restaurants where students gathered. She had friends, a social world, the rhythms of a young person's summer in a college town. She was close with her family back in New York, the daughter of parents who loved her and a sister who adored her. She was, in short, a young woman in the middle of an ordinary, promising life, with every reason to expect the whole of it still ahead of her. Nothing about her circumstances marked her as someone about to disappear. She was simply a college student on a summer night, which is what makes what happened so haunting. You're in Bloomington, Indiana, in the first days of June, and it is a warm Midwestern college town in the quiet of the summer term. The great university sits at the center of it, and around the campus runs the familiar geography of student life, the apartment blocks and the bars, the alleys and the intersections, the short walkable distances that students cross 100 times without a thought. On the night of June 2nd, going into the 3rd, Lauren goes out into this ordinary landscape the way countless students do on a summer night, to be with friends, to have some drinks, to enjoy the loose, warm freedom of a night with no obligations. There is nothing to mark the night as different from any other, and it becomes the night that everything turns on. It helps to understand how compact and walkable the setting of that night was, because the small distances are part of what makes the case so haunting. The downtown of a college town like Bloomington is a tight cluster of bars, apartments, and businesses, the whole social world of student nightlife packed into a few short blocks. The bars where students gather, the apartment buildings where they live, the alleys and sidewalks and intersections that connect them are all within a few minutes' walk of each other. On any given night, thousands of young people move through that small grid, crossing the same short distances, walking the same roads home, in a landscape so familiar and so ordinary that no one thinks of it as dangerous. Lauren's entire last night unfolded within that compact world, a few blocks of a sleeping college town. That compactness is exactly what makes the disappearance so difficult to comprehend. Lauren was never far from home. The distances she needed to cover to reach safety were tiny, the kind a person walks without thinking. When she was last seen, she was only a short distance from her own apartment, a walk of minutes. And somewhere in that short, familiar, well-traveled stretch, in a town packed with people and cameras and the ordinary safety of numbers, she vanished. It was not a wilderness. It was not a remote road. It was the busy, walkable heart of a college town, and she disappeared from it as completely as if she had stepped off the edge of the world. That is one of the things people find hardest to accept about the case, that it happened not in some isolated place, but in the middle of an ordinary, populated town. You're standing at that last intersection again, thinking about how close she was to home, and it deepens the ache of the case. A few more blocks, a few more minutes of walking. That is all that separated Lauren from her own door, from her bed, from the ordinary safety of home. She had crossed that small distance countless times. On this night, for reasons no one has ever established, she did not complete it. Whatever happened in that last short stretch, the final few minutes of a walk she had made 100 times before. The smallness of the distance is part of the horror. She was so close to safe, and she never arrived, and no one has ever been able to say why. Let's walk through that night carefully, because it has been reconstructed in extraordinary detail, and because every step of it matters. Lauren began the evening at her own apartment, and at some point after midnight, she left it in the company of a young man named David Rohn, a friend, heading out into the night. We should pause here, at the very first name, to say what we will say about every name in this story. David Rohn was a friend of Lauren's, one of the people who was with her that night, and he has never been charged with anything, and there is no basis to regard him as anything other than what the record shows, a young man who was part of Lauren's evening. We name him because the documented timeline names him, and for no other reason, and we extend to him the presumption of innocence that he is fully owed. From there, the night moved through the ordinary stations of a college evening out. Lauren made her way to the apartment of another young man, Jason Rosenbaum, where she encountered a young man named Corey Rossman, and the group's night carried on. By about 1:46 in the morning, surveillance cameras recorded Lauren entering Kilroy's Sports Bar, one of the popular student bars in downtown Bloomington. She was on camera, alive and present, part of the ordinary crush of a college bar late on a summer night. For a little while, the record of Lauren is clear and unremarkable, a young woman out with friends, captured on the cameras that watch over a busy nightlife district, doing nothing more unusual than being 20 years old on a summer night. At about 2:27 in the morning, the cameras recorded Lauren leaving Kilroy's, and here the night began to take on the shape that would haunt everyone who studied it afterward. When she left the bar, Lauren left things behind. She left without her cell phone, and she left without her shoes, walking out barefoot into the early morning. Corey Rossman left with her, and by the accounts given, he walked with her from the bar toward her apartment complex. The detail of the shoes and the phone left behind is one of the first signs in the timeline of how impaired Lauren had become over the course of the night, because a person in ordinary control of herself does not usually walk out of a bar without her shoes. By this point, Lauren was very drunk, and her impairment is one of the central and most painful facts of the whole night. We have to talk about that impairment carefully, because it matters to the case and because it must never become a reproach against Lauren. She was a 20-year-old college student who had too much to drink on a night out, which is a thing that a great many young people do and survive without consequence. Her intoxication is relevant only because it made her vulnerable, because it left her less able to protect herself, less able to make safe choices, more dependent on the people around her to see her home safely. It is not a moral failing, and it is not a reason to blame her for what happened. If anything, it is a reason for tenderness, because it means that in her last documented hours, Lauren was not fully herself, was not operating with her ordinary judgment, and needed care. To blame a young woman for being harmed because she had been drinking is one of the ugliest reflexes in the telling of these stories, and we reject it completely. By about 2:30 in the morning, cameras recorded Lauren entering the Smallwood Plaza apartment building. Around this time, a passerby, another young person out in the early morning, later described how visibly intoxicated Lauren appeared, how unsteady and impaired she was. This is part of the documented record. An outside observer noting the state Lauren was in. She was moving through the early morning streets of Bloomington in a condition that left her deeply vulnerable, and the ordinary safety net that should catch a person in that state, the friends, the sense of a group getting each other home, was fraying in the confusion of a long night. You're on those quiet Bloomington streets in the small hours after 2 in the morning, and the town has emptied out to the last stragglers of the night. The bars are closing. A few knots of students drift home along the sidewalks and through the alleys and parking areas that cut between the apartment blocks. Somewhere among them is Lauren, barefoot, without her phone, deeply impaired, moving through the familiar geography of her college town in a state that leaves her at the mercy of the night and the people in it. It is an ordinary scene, the tail end of a college night, and it is also the setting of a tragedy that is quietly beginning to unfold, though no one watching would have known it. Between about 2:48 and 2:51 in the morning, Lauren was recorded, or later traced, moving through an alley in the downtown area between College Avenue and Morton Street. Along the route she traveled that night, 2 more of her belongings would later be found, her keys and her small bag. Like the shoes and the phone left at the bar, these dropped and abandoned belongings tell the story of a young woman who was no longer keeping track of her things, who was shedding the ordinary objects of her life as she moved through the night in her impaired state. Each recovered item is a small, sad marker on the map of her last hours, a point where Lauren passed and left a trace, on the way to the point where the trail finally goes cold. There's something almost unbearably poignant in that trail of shed belongings, and it is worth sitting with for a moment. A phone left at the bar, shoes left behind, keys dropped in an alley, a small bag abandoned along the way. One by one, across the last hours anyone can account for, Lauren let go of the ordinary objects that tether a person to the world. She was not doing it on purpose. She was impaired, exhausted, no longer keeping track, but the effect, read on the map of that night, is haunting. A young woman gradually stripped of the small things that connect her to safety and home, until she was walking barefoot and empty-handed into the last of the dark, carrying nothing at all. Those objects became, in a sense, the last things Lauren left the world, the physical traces of her final known hours. Investigators recovered them and mapped them and used them to build the timeline. The family knows every one of them, and each is a small heartbreak, because each marks a place where Lauren still was, still moving, still alive, on a night that was carrying her toward a threshold no one saw her cross. The phone that could have called for help, left behind. The shoes that might have carried her home, gone. The keys to her own door, dropped in an alley she would never reach the end of. The belongings tell the story of the night better than words can. A slow letting go, ending in a young woman with nothing, walking away alone. You're following that trail of small lost things across a college town in the dark, and it reads like a map of vulnerability deepening step by step. Here is where she left her phone. Here is where she left her shoes. Here is the alley where her keys were found. Each marker is closer to the blank at the center of the case, and each one shows a young woman a little more impaired, a little more exposed, a little further from the ordinary safety of a life with all its objects intact. The trail of belongings is the closest thing the case has to a narrative of the disappearance itself, and it ends, as everything in this case ends, at the edge of the unseen, with Lauren walking on alone into the part of the night that no one has ever been able to recover. The night's path led to the apartment of Corey Rossman, where his roommate, a young man named Michael Beth, was present. We pause again, as we will keep pausing, to be clear and fair. Corey Rossman and Michael Beth were young men whose apartment Lauren came to that night, and neither of them has ever been charged with anything, and neither is a criminal suspect, and both cooperated with the investigation. We name them because the timeline the investigators built names them, and for no other reason. There is a version of this story that rushes to suspicion at the mention of an intoxicated young woman arriving at a young man's apartment in the middle of the night. And that rush to suspicion is exactly what we are not going to do, because it is unfair, because it is unproven, and because these are real people who have never been charged with any wrong. The timeline then moved to the apartment of Jason Rosenbaum, and here we reach some of the details that have drawn the most attention and the most speculation over the years, which means they are exactly the details we must handle with the most care. By the accounts given, at some point Lauren had a bruise, a mark under her eye, and there were reports of an altercation earlier in the night involving one of the young men, the kind of confused physical incident that can happen in the blur of a long night of drinking. From Rosenbaum's apartment, in the hours before dawn, Lauren reportedly made 2 phone calls, to David Rohn and to another friend, and neither call was answered. Picture that small, sad detail. A young woman in the last hours anyone can account for, reaching out by phone to friends and getting no answer. The calls ringing out into the night. We must be especially careful here, because the mention of a bruise and an altercation is precisely the kind of detail that speculation seizes upon and builds into an accusation. So let us be as clear as we possibly can. The existence of a bruise does not tell us how it happened, and there are many innocent ways a deeply intoxicated person can come by a mark in the course of a chaotic night. The reports of an altercation are part of the murky, contested record of a confusing evening, and they have never resulted in a criminal charge against anyone. Jason Rosenbaum, like the others, cooperated with the investigation and has never been charged with any crime. To take these fragments and assemble them into a story of violence is to go far beyond what the evidence supports, and we are not going to do it. We are going to report what the record contains, and then hold the line at fairness. You're in those last documented hours before dawn in an apartment in Bloomington, and Lauren is there, impaired and tired and far from the safety of her own bed, in the confused fog of the end of a long night. The details are murky, the accounts imperfect, the memories of everyone present shaped by alcohol and exhaustion, and later by the trauma of what came after. This is the frustrating truth of Lauren's last hours. They were spent in the least reliable of all human conditions, the drunk and disordered end of a night, among young people whose memories would never be able to reconstruct it with certainty. The very hours that mattered most are the hours that are hardest to know, and that difficulty is not, in itself, evidence of anyone's guilt. It is simply the nature of the night. The last reported sighting of Lauren Spierer came at around 4:30 in the morning. By the account given, Jason Rosenbaum reported seeing Lauren leave, last glimpsing her near the intersection of 11th Street and College Avenue, heading south in the direction, roughly, of her own apartment. She was barefoot, dressed in black leggings and a white shirt, a tiny young woman walking off alone into the last of the dark in the grey hour before a summer dawn. And that is the end of the record. That is the last moment anyone reports having seen Lauren Spierer. Somewhere beyond that intersection, in the short distance between where she was last seen and wherever she was going, in the thinning dark of a June morning, Lauren vanished, and no camera and no witness has ever accounted for what happened next. You're at that intersection in the grey light before dawn, watching a small barefoot figure walk away south along an empty college town street, and it is the last image the world has of Lauren Spierer. The street is quiet, the town is asleep, the bars have long since closed, and the last of the night people have gone home, and a 20-year-old woman, impaired and barefoot and alone, walks off into the ordinary emptiness of a summer morning toward a few hundred yards of sidewalk that no one was watching and is never seen again. Everything the case has been for 15 years lives in that short, unwatched stretch of street, in the gap between the last sighting and the silence that followed. It is worth pausing on how that detailed timeline came to exist, because it is one of the things that makes Lauren's case so distinctive and so maddening. In the days and weeks after she vanished, investigators did painstaking work, gathering surveillance footage from the bars and apartment buildings and businesses along the paths Lauren traveled, interviewing everyone who had been part of her night and stitching it all together into an hour-by-hour, block-by-block reconstruction of her movements. This is difficult, careful work, and the Bloomington investigators did a great deal of it. The result was a timeline more detailed than exists in most missing persons cases, a record that could place Lauren at specific places, at specific minutes across the last night of her known life. In many cases, families would give anything for such a record. In Lauren's case, they had it, and it still was not enough. There is a cruel paradox in that. We tend to assume that more information means a better chance of an answer, that if only we could reconstruct a person's last hours in detail, the truth would fall out of the reconstruction. Lauren's case shatters that assumption. Her last night is known in remarkable detail, and the detail leads again and again to the same blank wall. The moment after the last sighting, the unwatched stretch of street, the silence that no camera caught. The timeline is like a brightly lit hallway that ends at a locked door. It shows you everything right up to the threshold of the mystery, and then it stops, and the mystery itself, the actual disappearance, remains as dark as if there had been no cameras at all. Have you ever wondered whether knowing more can sometimes make a loss harder rather than easier? Whether a detailed map of the road to a tragedy can deepen the pain of not knowing where the road finally led? For Lauren's family, the richness of the timeline is a double-edged thing. On one hand, it means they can follow their daughter almost to the end, can see her on the cameras, can trace her steps. On the other hand, it means they have been brought right to the edge of the answer again and again, only to find the edge is where the knowledge stops. To have so much and still not have the one thing that matters is its own particular torment. And it is a torment the detailed record has, in a sense, sharpened rather than eased. And the people who knew her realized that she was simply gone. In the daylight of June 3rd, the ordinary machinery of concern began to turn. The calls, the questions, the growing dread as it became clear that no one knew where Lauren was, that she was not sleeping it off somewhere, that she had not simply lost her phone and wandered home. A young woman who had been on camera and among friends only hours before had evaporated, and the more people compared notes, the more frightening the blank became. Her belongings were scattered across the night, her phone and shoes at the bar, her keys and bag along an alley, and Lauren herself was nowhere. The realization settled slowly, and then, all at once, Lauren Spierer was missing. When her parents got the call, they did what the parents in these stories always do. Robert and Charlene Spierer left their life in New York and came to Bloomington, and they threw themselves into the search for their daughter with a ferocity and a persistence that has defined the case ever since. They did not sit back and wait. They organized searches, worked with investigators, spoke to the media, and refused to let Lauren's disappearance fade into the background. In the days and weeks after Lauren vanished, Bloomington filled with the effort to find her. Volunteers combing fields and wooded areas, police running down every lead, the whole apparatus of a major missing person search grinding into motion around the absence of one small young woman. You're in Bloomington in the days after Lauren vanished, and the town has become the stage of a desperate search. There are volunteers walking lines through fields and woods. There are flyers with Lauren's face in every window. There are investigators knocking on doors and pulling every piece of surveillance footage they can find, building the detailed timeline that would become the strange centerpiece of the case. And at the heart of it are two parents from New York, suddenly living in a college town that has become the site of their worst nightmare, doing everything a family can do to find a daughter who has simply disappeared. The search was enormous, and it was thorough, and it found so much about Lauren's last night, and still it did not find Lauren. Among the searches was a grim and thorough effort at a landfill, a place searchers turn to when they fear the worst, in August of 2011. For 9 days, investigators searched the Sycamore Ridge landfill, doing the terrible, painstaking work of looking for any sign of Lauren in a place no family ever wants to imagine. They found nothing. Over the years, thousands of tips came in, more than 3,000 of them by a couple of years into the case, each one weighed and checked, each one a small flicker of possibility that had to be run down. The sheer volume of effort poured into finding Lauren is staggering, and the fact that all of it, the searches and the tips and the reconstructed timeline, has never located her or explained her disappearance is part of what makes the case so uniquely frustrating. The landfill search deserves a moment of its own because it captures something about the grim thoroughness of the effort and about what the searchers feared. When investigators search a landfill, they are preparing for the worst possible answer. It is slow, awful, methodical work, sifting through mountains of refuse for any trace of a human being, and it is not undertaken lightly. For 9 days in the heat of an Indiana August, searchers did that work, hoping and dreading in equal measure that they might find some sign of Lauren. They found nothing. The search was a dead end, one of many, but it stands as a marker of how far the effort went, of the lengths to which people were willing to go to find a young woman who had simply vanished. No stone was left unturned, and still no Lauren. You're watching that search from a distance, and it is one of the bleakest images in the whole case. There is the landfill, vast and grim under the summer sun. There are the searchers in their protective gear, doing the grim, patient work of looking for a lost young woman in the worst of all places. There is the family, somewhere, waiting to learn whether this is the day their daughter is found, and in what condition. The search ends with nothing, which is both a mercy and a fresh cruelty. Another answer withheld, another possibility neither confirmed nor closed. That is the texture of a case like this, a series of exhausting efforts that each end in the same place, in the absence of Lauren and the absence of an answer. Over the years, the thousands of tips brought their own cycle of hope and disappointment. Each one had to be evaluated. Each one carried for the family a flicker of possibility. Perhaps this call, this letter, this anonymous message is the one that finally breaks the case. And then, again and again, the tip is checked and it dissolves, and the family is left exactly where they were. To live a case like this is to ride that cycle for years, the rise of hope and the fall of it, never quite able to stop hoping and never able to trust the hope. The volume of tips is a testament to how many people cared, how many were watching, how many wanted to help, and the fact that none of them has closed the case is a testament to how deep the silence at the center of it truly runs. Now we come to the part of the story that requires the most care of all, the question of the young men who were with Lauren on her last night, and we are going to approach it the way we have approached every mention of them, with a firm and repeated commitment to their presumption of innocence. The names of several young men are woven through the timeline of Lauren's last hours, because they were the people she was with: David Rohn and Corey Rossman and Jason Rosenbaum and Michael Beth. Over the 15 years since Lauren vanished, an enormous amount of public speculation has swirled around these men, precisely because they were the last known people to see her. And that speculation, however natural it may feel, has never been matched by a single criminal charge against any of them. Let us state this as plainly as it can be stated. None of these men has ever been charged with any crime in connection with Lauren's disappearance. None of them has ever been named by authorities as a criminal suspect. They cooperated with the investigation. It has been reported that they submitted to and passed polygraph examinations, the evidence that would be required to charge a person with a crime, real evidence, the kind that can stand up in a court of law, has never emerged against any of them. In the eyes of the law, and in the account we are giving tonight, these are innocent men, and being the last to see someone is not a crime, and cooperating with an investigation is the act of a person with nothing to hide, and passing a polygraph, whatever its limits, is not the behavior the guilty are usually imagined to display. Have you ever wondered how heavy a burden it must be to be publicly, permanently attached to a tragedy you had no part in, to have your name searched forever alongside the disappearance of a young woman, simply because you were there on the wrong night? That is the burden these young men have carried, and whatever anyone privately suspects, the fact remains that they have never been shown to have done anything wrong, and they are entitled to the same presumption of innocence that protects all of us. It is worth remembering that they too were young people caught in a nightmare, that they lost a friend that night, that they have lived under a cloud of suspicion for a decade and a half without ever being charged. A story like Lauren's produces more than one kind of victim, and while nothing compares to the loss of Lauren herself, the ruin that baseless suspicion can bring to innocent lives is real, and we refuse to add to it. To be fair, we should acknowledge honestly why suspicion has clung to this case, because pretending otherwise would be dishonest. The men were the last to see Lauren. The accounts of the night are murky and, in places, inconsistent, shaped by heavy drinking and the passage of time. There was a bruise and reports of some kind of altercation and the ordinary confusions of a chaotic night. All of that is real, and all of it has fueled 15 years of speculation. But here is the crucial thing. Murkiness is not proof. Inconsistent memories among drunk young people are not evidence of a crime. The last people to see someone are, by simple logic, always going to be under scrutiny, and that scrutiny is not the same as guilt. The honest position, the only fair one, is that the confusion of that night has never been resolved into evidence against anyone, and confusion alone convicts no one. This is a case that has drawn an enormous amount of online attention over the years, and that attention has a dark side that is worth naming directly because it bears on the innocence we keep insisting upon. Lauren's disappearance, with its detailed timeline and its cast of named young men, became a magnet for amateur investigation, for the kind of internet sleuthing that treats a real tragedy as a puzzle to be solved from a keyboard. Over the years, the young men who were with Lauren that night have been named, discussed, accused, and vilified across the internet by strangers who have appointed themselves detectives and judges. Their names have been dragged through countless threads and videos and comment sections, attached forever to a crime that has never been shown to have occurred, let alone shown to be theirs. We have to be honest about how much harm that does, because it is a harm this channel refuses to add to. When strangers on the internet decide, on no evidence, that a particular person is guilty, they can do real and lasting damage to a real human life. They can make a person unemployable, unsafe, unable to move through the world without the weight of a public accusation they were never given the chance to answer in a court. And they can do all of this to a person who is, in fact, innocent, who was never charged, who cooperated with the investigation, who lost a friend that night, and then lost years of their life to suspicion. The men in Lauren's case may know more or less than they have said, like anyone caught in a chaotic night, but not one of them has been shown to be guilty of anything. And the internet's long campaign of suspicion against them is not justice. It is the opposite of justice. To be fair, the impulse behind much of that attention is not malicious. People care about Lauren. They want her found. They want the truth known. They want her family to have peace. And in the absence of an answer, that caring curdles into speculation, and speculation hardens into accusation. The desire is understandable. The result is often unjust. And the line between keeping a case alive, which is genuinely valuable, and destroying innocent people with baseless accusation, which is genuinely harmful, is a line that a great deal of the online discussion of this case has trampled right over. We are trying tonight to stay on the right side of that line, to keep Lauren's case alive without doing harm to the living, and we would gently ask everyone who cares about this case to try to do the same, which is to say that the most useful thing any of us can do with our interest in Lauren's case is to keep it pointed at the truth and away from the ruin of the innocent. Share accurate information. Keep her name and face in front of the world. Point anyone with real knowledge toward the authorities who can act on it, but refuse to name, accuse, or convict people the law has never charged, because that is not how justice works, and because a wrongful accusation is its own kind of violence, and because Lauren, who was herself the victim of a terrible injustice, would not be honored by the visiting of injustice on others in her name. It is worth trying for a moment to imagine the position of those young men in the years since, not to center them over Lauren, but because fairness asks it of us. They were college students who went out on a summer night, like millions of others. By the end of it, a friend of theirs had vanished, and they were the last known people to have seen her. That alone would be a heavy thing to carry, the grief of losing someone and the horror of having been there. But they have carried far more than grief. They have carried a public suspicion that has never lifted, their names permanently searchable alongside a young woman's disappearance, their faces circulated, their every reported word passed for guilt by strangers. Whatever any of them knows or does not know, that is a hard life to live, and it has been visited on people the law has never charged. To be fair, some will say that the suspicion is their own doing, that a fully innocent person would have behaved differently, would have said more, would have been clearer, perhaps. But we should be careful with that reasoning, because people caught in the sudden horror of a tragedy, questioned about a night blurred by alcohol, advised by lawyers, frightened and grieving, do not always behave the way our imaginations think the innocent should. Silence can be guilt, or it can be fear. Inconsistency can be deception, or it can be the ordinary failure of memory under stress. The law recognizes this, which is why it does not convict on suspicion, and why the presumption of innocence exists precisely to protect people in exactly this position. We extend that presumption to the young men in Lauren's case, fully and without reservation, because that is what justice requires. You're looking at the whole shape of this case now, and its cruelty is that it has produced suffering in every direction and resolution in none. There is Lauren, lost. There is her family, living in ambiguous grief for 15 years. There is a community shaken, a town haunted, and there are the young men who have lived under a shadow that has never lifted, for a crime that has never been shown to exist. Everyone in this story has been hurt, and no one has been given an answer. That is the peculiar devastation of a case like Lauren's, that it wounds so widely and resolves so little, leaving a whole constellation of people caught in the same unending question. The family did, at one point, take a legal step that is often misunderstood, and it is worth explaining carefully. In 2013, the Spierer family filed a civil lawsuit against 3 of the young men, Rossman, Rosenbaum, and Beth. But it is essential to understand what that suit did and did not allege. It was a civil negligence claim, and its argument was that the men had provided alcohol to a visibly intoxicated Lauren and had failed to see her safely home, and that this negligence had contributed to her disappearance. It was not a claim that any of them had harmed her, not an accusation of violence or abduction or murder. It was a claim about a duty of care and a failure to get a drunk friend home safely. And even that limited claim did not survive. The courts dismissed the suits between 2013 and 2015, finding that the men had no legal duty of the kind the suit alleged. A federal appeals court upheld the dismissals. Even the narrow civil claim of negligence, far short of any accusation of violence, failed in court, which is to say that after 15 years, every formal legal avenue that has ever been pursued against these men has ended without a finding against them, no criminal charge, a civil negligence suit dismissed. It is difficult to imagine a clearer set of signals that, whatever the swirl of public suspicion, the actual legal record contains nothing against these young men. And so we hold firmly and finally to the position we have held throughout. They are innocent in the eyes of the law. We will not accuse them. We will not imply their guilt. And we would ask you, listening tonight, to extend them the same fairness because they are real people and because Lauren's memory is not served by the ruin of the innocent. So if we hold the innocent aside, what possibilities are left, and how should we think about them? Honestly, and with humility, is the answer. The truth is that no one knows what happened to Lauren after she was last seen, and any responsible telling has to lay out the range of possibilities without pretending to choose among them. Broadly, there are a few. There is the possibility of a medical event tied to Lauren's heart condition and her state that night. There is the possibility of an accident, some misadventure that befell an impaired young woman alone in the dark. And there is the possibility of foul play at the hands of someone, known or unknown, who took advantage of her vulnerability. Each of these is possible. None of them has ever been proven. And the honest work is to hold them all gently in the open. Let's take the medical possibility first, because it is the one that flows from Lauren's own body and is too often overlooked in the rush toward darker theories. As we said at the start, Lauren had long QT syndrome, a condition that can cause sudden and dangerous disturbances of the heart's rhythm, especially under stress or the influence of alcohol. On that night, Lauren was profoundly intoxicated, exhausted, and moving through the small hours in a fragile state. It is medically plausible that a young woman with her condition, in that state, could have suffered a sudden cardiac event. If something like that happened while she was alone, in some out-of-the-way spot, it is possible that she collapsed somewhere she was not found, and that the ordinary tragic physics of the world took over from there. This is not a comforting thought, but it is a real one, and it is important precisely because it involves no villain at all, only a vulnerable body and a cruel night. You're following the medical possibility to its quiet, sad conclusion, and it is a different kind of tragedy than the one people usually imagine. In this version, there is no abduction, no violence, no one to blame. There is only a young woman with a hidden vulnerability in her own heart, impaired and alone in the dark, whose body may simply have failed her at the worst possible moment, in a place where no one found her in time. It is a version of the story that many people resist, because it is so much less satisfying than a tale of villains and justice, because it offers no one to be angry at and no crime to solve. But we owe it a fair hearing, because it fits the medical facts, and because the universe does not owe our stories a villain. Have you ever wondered whether the hardest truths to accept are the ones with no one to blame? The tragedies that are simply tragedies without a culprit at the center to give our anger somewhere to go. Lauren's case may be one of those, or it may not. We genuinely do not know. But the medical possibility deserves to sit alongside the others precisely because it resists the human hunger for a culprit. To be fair, it is only a possibility, and there are things about the case, the scattered belongings, the unfound body, that it does not fully explain, but it belongs in any honest telling. And it is a reminder that not every disappearance is a crime, and that sometimes the cruelest explanations are the ones with no criminal in them at all. The possibility of an accident sits close beside the medical one. Lauren was barefoot, deeply impaired, and alone in the dark in a town threaded with roads, water, and the ordinary hazards that become dangerous to a person who cannot fully take care of herself. It is possible that some accident befell her, a fall, an encounter with traffic, a wander into a dangerous place, and that she came to harm without anyone intending it. Like the medical possibility, this one involves no villain, only the terrible vulnerability of an impaired young woman alone at night. And like the medical possibility, it cannot be proven, but it cannot be dismissed either. It is part of the honest range of what might have happened in that unwatched stretch of the early morning. And then, yes, there is the possibility of foul play, the possibility that someone crossed Lauren's path in her most vulnerable hour and did her harm. If that is what happened, the person responsible could be someone from that night, though the record has never produced evidence against the men we have discussed. Or it could be a stranger, an opportunist who encountered a vulnerable young woman alone in the dark and seized upon her helplessness. To be fair, in a college town in the small hours, a tiny, barefoot, deeply intoxicated young woman walking alone is heartbreakingly vulnerable to a dangerous stranger, and that possibility can never be ruled out. But here too, we have no proof, no identified person, no evidence that turns the possibility into a fact. It remains one branch of the unknown, held open alongside the others. Over the years, investigators have followed threads that led away from Lauren's immediate circle, and these too deserve a careful and fair mention. At various points, the search reached outward. There was a property search in the countryside near Martinsville, some years into the case, connected to a name that had come to investigators' attention, where cadaver dogs reportedly showed interest, but a careful dig turned up nothing tied to Lauren. There was later public discussion of whether a man convicted in a completely separate case, the murder of another young Indiana University student, might have had any connection to Lauren's disappearance. It is important to be exact here. That man was never charged in Lauren's case, and the suggestion of a possible link was just that, a suggestion, never supported by evidence sufficient to charge him. We mention these threads because they are part of the honest history of the investigation, and we mention their outcomes because fairness demands it. Each of them was pursued. None of them produced an answer or a charge in Lauren's case. To be fair, the fact that investigators looked outward, beyond the young men of that night, is itself meaningful. It reflects an investigation that did not simply fixate on the last people to see Lauren, but genuinely searched in multiple directions, considering strangers and other possibilities. That breadth is a mark of a serious investigation, and it is also a reminder that the answer to Lauren's disappearance might lie somewhere no one has yet thought to look, with someone whose name has never come up, in a direction the case has not yet turned. The unknown in Lauren's case is genuinely wide. It is not narrowed to a handful of suspects. It is open in every direction, which is part of why it has been so hard to close. Which brings us back, as this story always must, to Lauren's family, because their endurance is the thread that has held the case together for 15 years. Robert and Charlene Spierer, Lauren's parents, did not fade quietly into grief. They became relentless, tireless advocates for their daughter, keeping her name and face before the public year after year, working with investigators, pushing the case forward, refusing to let Bloomington or the wider world forget that a young woman had vanished and never been found. They have spoken publicly, painfully, again and again, of their belief that Lauren is no longer alive, and of their simple, unyielding desire to bring her home and to learn the truth of what happened to her. There is a particular kind of grief in what the Spierers carry, and it has a name. Psychologists call it ambiguous loss. It is the grief of a person who is gone but not confirmed gone, absent in body but unresolved in fact. It denies the mind the terrible mercy of certainty. A family in ambiguous loss cannot fully mourn because mourning feels like a betrayal of hope. They cannot fully hope because hope feels like a denial of reason. So they are caught in the space between, year after year, unable to move fully in either direction. It is one of the hardest forms of loss a human being can endure, and the Spierers have lived inside it for 15 years. The family has said openly that they believe Lauren is dead. That is not a surrender. It is, in its way, an act of painful courage, the choice to face the most likely truth rather than to cling to a hope that the years have worn away. But believing is not the same as knowing, and a belief, however reasoned, cannot be buried or grieved the way a certainty can. The Spierers believe their daughter is gone, and they still do not know where she is, still cannot bring her home, still cannot lay her to rest. They live in the gap between what they believe and what they can prove, and that gap is a hard place to live. It has no floor and no ceiling. It simply goes on. You're inside that ambiguous loss with a family that has lived there for over a decade, and it is a strange and exhausting country. There is no funeral to hold because there is no body to bury. There is no grave to visit, no final place where a daughter rests. There is only the open question, renewed every morning, of where Lauren is and what happened to her. Most losses, however terrible, eventually offer the grieving a solid fact to build a life around. Ambiguous loss offers none. It asks a family to build a life on a question, and the Spierers have done exactly that, with a grace that is difficult to comprehend for 15 long years. To be fair, The years do bring a certain hard-won steadiness, even to a loss like this. The Spierers have learned to carry what cannot be put down, to live alongside the question rather than being destroyed by it, to channel the grief into advocacy and the advocacy into purpose. That is not the same as healing, and they would be the first to say so. But it is a kind of endurance that deserves to be honored, the slow, daily work of remaining whole around an absence that never fills. Lauren's parents have done that work every day for 15 years, and it is one of the quietly heroic things in this whole sad story. The loss, of course, is not the parents alone. Lauren had a sister, and a wider family, and a circle of friends, and every one of them absorbed a piece of the wound. A disappearance does not injure only the closest few. It sends a shock through an entire web of relationships, through everyone who loved the missing person, and everyone whose life was woven with theirs. Lauren's friends had to learn to live without her, to carry the particular guilt and grief that survivors carry, to grow older while she stayed forever 20. Her sister lost a sibling and gained a lifelong absence. The people who loved Lauren have each had to find their own way to live with a loss that never resolved, and there are more of them, quietly carrying it, than any headline ever shows. Over the years, the Spierer family has also reached outward, turning their own hard-won and unwanted expertise toward helping others. Families thrown suddenly into the nightmare of a disappearance often find few guides, little support, and a bewildering system to navigate. The Spierers, having lived it, have become a source of support and advocacy for others in the same position, using their painful experience to help strangers through the worst days of their lives. That impulse to turn private catastrophe into help for others is one of the more moving things that grief can produce. It does not lessen the loss, but it gives it a kind of meaning that the family, and not the tragedy, chose to create. You're watching a family that has every reason to close in on itself, instead reach outward again and again toward other people's pain. That is not the natural motion of grief. Grief tends to turn inward, to curl around the wound. It takes a deliberate act of will and love to face outward instead, to say that if this had to happen, some good will come of it, that other families will be helped because of what we suffered. The Spierers have done that, in Lauren's name, for years. And it is one more reason that the memory of Lauren Spierer has become larger than the tragedy of her disappearance, a name attached not only to a loss, but to the persistence and generosity of the people who loved her. You're watching a family live inside an open wound for 15 years, and the endurance it requires is almost beyond comprehension. Every June brings another anniversary, another round of interviews, another public plea. Every year that passes is a year without their daughter and without an answer. The Spierers have carried this with a dignity that has moved a great many people, channeling their grief into advocacy, into support for other families of the missing, into a refusal to let Lauren's case go cold in the public mind. They have done the hardest thing a family can do, which is to keep going, to keep speaking, to keep hoping for truth across a decade and a half of silence. Have you ever wondered what it cost to keep a search alive for 15 years, to stand up every single June and say your daughter's name to a world that has mostly moved on, to hold open a wound that everyone else is allowed to let close? That is what the Spierer family has done. Their persistence is not a natural or effortless thing. It is a chosen, daily act of love and will renewed against exhaustion and grief and the long erosion of hope. And it is the reason that 15 years on, Lauren's case is still spoken of, still investigated, still capable, at least in principle, of one day being solved. A family's refusal to give up is often the only thing that keeps a case like this alive. And the Spierers have refused with everything they have. The disappearance also left a lasting mark on Bloomington itself and on Indiana University, the community where Lauren vanished. A college town is a place of transient youth, of thousands of young people passing through on their way to their adult lives, and it likes to think of itself as safe, a protected bubble of learning and growing up. Lauren's disappearance shook that sense of safety, reminding a whole community that even the ordinary rituals of college life, a night out with friends, a walk home in the dark, carry a vulnerability that is easy to forget. In the years since, Lauren's case has become part of the memory of the place, a story that older residents and returning alumni still carry, a name that still surfaces every June. The town has not forgotten her, and the case still, in the words of those who live there, haunts Bloomington. Every June, as the anniversary of Lauren's disappearance comes around, the case returns to the surface of the town's attention and the wider world's. There are new stories marking the years, 10, then 14, then 15. There are renewed appeals from the family and from the police. There is the annual painful ritual of speaking Lauren's name again, of reminding everyone that a young woman vanished here and was never found, of asking once more for anyone who knows anything to come forward. It would be easier for everyone to let the date pass in silence. The family has never allowed that, and neither has the town, and neither have the investigators. And so every June, Lauren is remembered, publicly and deliberately, against the natural pull of forgetting. To be fair, the annual remembrance is a double-edged thing for the people closest to it. Each anniversary reopens the wound, forces the family to relive the details, drags them back through the worst days of their lives in front of cameras and microphones. It is a hard thing to do, year after year, and no one would blame them for wanting to stop, but they understand what public attention means for an unsolved case. That visibility is oxygen, that the moment a case falls silent is the moment it is most likely to die. And so they keep speaking, keep marking the date, keep asking, trading their own peace for the small ongoing chance that the attention might one day reach the person who can end it. You're at one of those June gatherings years into the case, and you can feel the strange mixture of grief and stubborn hope that holds it together. There is Lauren's face, still young, still smiling, on the posters and the screens. There is her family, older now, marked by the years of a particular kind of waiting. There is a community that has refused to let her be forgotten, and reporters who still come, and the appeal spoken once more into the microphones, the same request that has gone out every year, that somebody, somewhere, who knows something, will finally find the courage to speak. It is a scene of sorrow, and it is also a scene of remarkable devotion. A family and a town refusing, year after year, to let the silence have the last word. You're in Bloomington on a warm June night years later, and the town is full of students living the same ordinary college life Lauren lived, walking the same streets, passing the same bars and apartment blocks. Most of them know the name, at least faintly, the young woman who disappeared and was never found. Her story has become a kind of quiet, cautionary presence in the town, a reminder woven into the place spoken of when students talk about walking home alone, about looking out for each other, about the thin line between an ordinary night and a tragedy. Lauren is part of Bloomington now, in a way no one would ever have wanted, present in the town's memory as an absence that never resolved. There is a lesson in Lauren's case that has nothing to do with blame, and it is worth speaking gently. The most dangerous moment in her night was the most ordinary one. It was the walk home. It was the short, familiar stretch of street that thousands of students cross every night without a thought. That is where she was last seen. That is where she vanished. And that is a truth that should make all of us a little more tender toward one another. Friends should get friends home. No one impaired should be left to walk alone in the dark. These are small things. They are also, sometimes, the difference between an ordinary night and a tragedy. We say this not to reproach anyone, and certainly not to reproach Lauren. We say it because it is the quiet, practical wisdom that so many of these cases leave behind. The vulnerability of a person alone at night is real. The safety of a group that looks after each other is real. Lauren's friends were young and impaired, and none of them could have known what the night would bring. Hindsight is cruel and cheap, and we do not offer it as a judgment. But the plain fact remains that the danger, when it came in the most unremarkable moment of all, and that fact has made a great many people in Bloomington and beyond a little more careful with each other. If anything good has come from Lauren's loss, it is that. You're on a campus somewhere on a warm night years later, watching a group of young people walk home together, one of them making sure the others get to their doors, and there is a small echo of Lauren in that ordinary care. Her story has entered the quiet lore of how young people look after each other, a name spoken when someone says, "Do not let her walk alone," when a friend waits to see another get safely inside. It is a small legacy, and a bittersweet one, and it is not remotely enough to balance the loss, but it is real. In the ordinary carefulness of strangers who never knew her, Lauren goes on, a reminder woven into the small kindnesses that keep people safe. As the anniversaries have mounted, 10 years, then 14, then 15, the case has remained officially open and active, and the authorities have continued to say so. 15 years after Lauren vanished, the Bloomington police have affirmed that the case is not closed, that it remains an active investigation, that they still want to hear from anyone with information. That matters, because an open case is a case that can still be solved, a case where a new tip, a deathbed confession, a piece of long-held knowledge finally shared, could still break the silence. To be fair, 15 years is a very long time, and the passage of years makes any case harder, as memories fade and witnesses scatter and evidence grows cold. But the case is not dead, and Lauren's family and the investigators have refused to let it die. There is real reason to believe that a case like Lauren's can still be solved, even 15 years on, because cases far older than hers have broken open in recent years. Sometimes it is science, preserved evidence, tested with methods that did not exist at the time, has cracked cases that sat frozen for decades. Sometimes it is conscience. A person who has carried a secret for many years finally sets it down, tells someone, picks up a phone. Relationships change, loyalties shift. The reasons a person stayed silent fall away, and the truth they were holding finally comes out. Many old cases end not with a laboratory breakthrough, but with a human being who simply could not carry the weight any longer. Lauren's case could end either way, or in some way no one has yet imagined. If there is physical evidence somewhere, waiting, it could still speak. If there is a person who knows something, anything, they could still come forward. The detailed timeline that investigators built is still there, ready to be joined to whatever new piece finally emerges. To be fair, there is no guarantee, and 15 years of silence is a hard thing to break. But the case is genuinely open, genuinely active, and genuinely capable of resolution, which is more than can be said for many cases of its age. The honest word for Lauren's case is not hopeless. It is unsolved, which is a different thing entirely. Have you ever wondered how many answers are sitting quietly in the world right now, held in a memory or preserved in an envelope, one decision or one breakthrough away from finally coming to light? Lauren's answer may be one of them. Somewhere, the truth of what happened to her still exists. It did not cease to exist when the cameras lost her. It is real, and it is out there, in the physical world or in a human mind, waiting. The whole long effort of the family and the investigators and everyone who has kept Lauren's name alive is aimed at coaxing that truth into the open. It has not come yet, but it has not been proven impossible either. And in a case this open, that distinction still matters. For the family, there are really two things they long for, and it is worth naming them both, because they are not quite the same. One is the truth, the answer to what happened to Lauren in the last, unwatched stretch of that June night. The other is Lauren herself, the chance to find her and bring her home, to have a place to lay her to rest, to end the particular cruelty of a loss with no body and no grave. Sometimes those two hopes come together when the finding of a person also reveals the truth of their fate. Sometimes they come separately. The family would take either and both, and anything that moves them closer to peace. After 15 years, the wish is simple and enormous at once to know and to bring their daughter home. You're holding that double hope alongside the family now, and it is a heavy and a human thing. To find Lauren would be to end one long torment, the not having, the absence of any place to go and grieve. To learn the truth would be to end another, the not knowing, the endless open question. Neither would undo the loss, nothing can. But either would be a mercy, a solid fact to build the rest of a life around, a foundation where for 15 years there has been only open air. That is what the family has been reaching for all this time. And it is what everyone who has kept Lauren's story alive has been reaching for alongside them, the simple, hard-won mercy of an answer. To be fair, there is no way to promise that either mercy will come. Some cases are never solved, and some people are never found, and it would be a lie to pretend otherwise. But there is also no reason to declare it impossible, because cases do break, and the missing are sometimes found, even after decades, and the truth has a way of surfacing when it is least expected, which is to say that hope, in Lauren's case, is not foolishness. It is a reasonable response to an open question, and it is the fuel that has kept the search alive for 15 years, and it is worth holding on to, gently, for as long as the question stays open, which is to say that even now, the thing this case most needs is the same thing it has always needed, a single person deciding to speak. Somewhere, it is entirely possible. There is a person who knows something about what happened to Lauren Spierer in the last hours of that June night, something they have never told, whether out of fear or guilt or a mistaken belief that what they know does not matter. Cases like Lauren's, where the last hours are so well documented and the final moments so completely blank, are often waiting on exactly that, on the one person who holds a piece of the truth, finally setting it down. The timeline has been reconstructed as far as it can go. What remains is the human silence at the end of it, and only a human voice can break that. It is worth asking why Lauren's case, out of the many missing persons cases of its era, has held the public's attention so tightly for so long, because the answer says something about the case and about us. Part of it is the timeline itself, that eerie, detailed record that follows her so far and then stops, giving the mystery a shape people cannot look away from. Part of it is Lauren herself, young and bright and tiny and vivid, a person so easy to care about, so easy to see as a daughter or a sister or a friend. Part of it is the setting, the ordinary college night that so many people recognize from their own lives, which makes the horror feel close and possible rather than distant and rare. And part of it, the harder part, is the cast of named young people and the swirl of suspicion around them, which has made the case a kind of endless argument, a story people return to precisely because it has no ending and invites everyone to supply their own. That is the double edge of the attention. It has kept Lauren's name alive, which is genuinely valuable. It has also fed 15 years of speculation about the innocent, which is genuinely harmful. The task, for anyone who cares about this case, is to hold on to the first while refusing the second, to keep the attention pointed at finding Lauren and away from destroying the people around her. Have you ever wondered whether the cases that refuse to leave us are the ones that most need us to keep watching? The ones where our collective attention is not idle curiosity, but a kind of long vigil. Lauren's may be one of those. For 15 years, a great many strangers have kept her story alive alongside her family, and that shared attention is part of what still gives the case a chance. Every time her name is spoken with care, every time the facts are told fairly, the odds tick up, however slightly, that the story will reach the one person who can finally end it. Which is to say that remembering Lauren honestly and fairly is not a passive act. It is part of the search itself. If you are listening tonight and you know anything at all about what happened to Lauren Spierer, anything you saw or heard or were told in the years since, please contact the Bloomington Police Department or the appropriate authorities. Even a small detail, a memory that has nagged at you for years, could be the thread that finally brings Lauren home and gives her family the truth they have sought for 15 years. Please verify the current tip lines and any reward before relying on them, because such details change over time. But do not assume that what you know is too small to matter. In a case this documented and this open, the smallest piece of truth could be the one that finally completes the picture. It is worth pausing to consider what an answer would actually mean for the people who have waited so long, because it is not a simple thing. On one hand, an answer would end the terrible suspension the family has lived in for 15 years. It would replace the endless not knowing with solid ground, however painful that ground might be. Most families in this situation will tell you they want the truth above all, even a hard truth, because the not knowing is its own unbearable weight. To finally learn what happened to Lauren, to be able to bring her home, to grieve with certainty rather than hover forever between hope and fear, would be, in its way, a mercy. even if it confirmed the worst. On the other hand, an answer would also settle the long question of the young men, one way or the other, and either resolution would carry its own weight. If the truth turned out to involve no crime at all, a medical event or an accident, it would mean that 15 years of suspicion had fallen on innocent people for nothing. If it turned out otherwise, it would bring its own grief and its own reckoning. Either way, the truth would do what the truth does, which is to replace 100 imagined stories with a single real one, and to free everyone, the family and the innocent alike, from the prison of the unknown. To be fair, after 15 years, most of what remains is the hope for truth itself, and for Lauren to be brought home. And that hope is the one the whole case now rests upon, which is to say that the thing this case most needs is also the thing it most deserves: an ending, a truth, a resolution to a story that has stayed open for 15 long years. Somewhere the truth exists, in the physical world or in a human memory, waiting. And the whole long effort, the family's endurance, the investigators' work, the enduring attention of strangers, is aimed at coaxing that truth at last into the light. It has not come yet, but it is not impossible, and it may not even be far. The story of Lauren Spierer is unfinished, and unfinished is not the same as unfinishable. Let's come back at the end to Lauren herself, because in all the talk of timelines and surveillance and legal fairness, it is easy to lose the young woman at the center, and she deserves to be remembered as more than the mystery that swallowed her. Lauren Spierer was 20 years old, a bright and warm and magnetic young woman from Scarsdale, New York, a daughter and a sister and a friend, a college student with a whole life opening in front of her. She loved her friends and her family. She had plans and a future and a field she wanted to work in. She was small and vivid and full of life, and she was, on the night she vanished, simply a young person doing an ordinary young person's thing, out with friends on a summer night. She did nothing to deserve what happened to her, whatever it was. Remember Lauren tonight not as a cautionary tale or a puzzle to be solved, but as the young woman she was, loved beyond measure and lost far too soon. Remember, too, the family who have carried her through 15 years of silence with a devotion that ought to move anyone, and who ask only for the truth and the chance to bring her home. And remember the fairness we owe to everyone in this story, the refusal to accuse the innocent, the discipline of holding to what is known, which is not a coldness but a kind of respect for Lauren and for the truth alike. She was a real person, and her story is still unfinished, and unfinished is not the same as forgotten. Somewhere, the truth of what happened to Lauren Spierer still exists, held in the world or in someone's memory, waiting for the day it is finally spoken. Until that day, we keep her name where it belongs, in the light, spoken with care, held with love. She was here. She mattered to everyone who knew her, and she matters still. And her family's long search, and the enduring attention of everyone who refuses to let her be forgotten, is itself a kind of faith that the truth is not gone forever, only waiting. Rest easy, Lauren, and may the answer your family has sought for so long finally, at last, come home.